what is not trauma. I think it's very essential that I break down what isn't trauma to people, because I think trauma is a buzzword that a lot of people throw around, and they don't really know what it is and what it isn't. A lot of times, people, including myself, I have done this before. People often like think stress is trauma, but there are many differences between stress and trauma. The thing about trauma and stress is that trauma is stressful, but not all stress is traumatic. Trauma is always stressful, but not all stress is, traumatic. And I would say the major differences of this would be that, there is the first difference is that, see, if you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, that is a given. But you're just overwhelmed temporarily. It's not something that you have to that comes back constantly. Like people that go through that traumatized, it's not like the source of trauma is always there on their minds, all the time. But it's something that is highly frequent, is constantly reoccurring. And so that's a source of distress for them. Where, even in the face of if okay, so how do I put it? Yeah, when you're stressed, you're just overwhelmed. And that being overwhelmed is temporary. But when you're traumatized, a reaction that you get to being traumatized is that you have something they call, you have you're trying to cope. So you have something that psychiatrists call fragmentation. And this is very common. And I'm going to just say these symptoms because I think it's good that people are aware of what this idea of fragmentation is, so that it might, because it happens to a lot of people. Fragmentation is like your body trying to cope with a traumatic event. So it's retreating into itself. That's the best way I can explain it. You have different kinds of fragmentation. Sometimes people depersonalize. Depersonalization is just you detach from your sense of self. So the easiest way I can explain it is that if, for example, you see a trigger, there's a trigger, whatever your trigger is in your mind, you see a trigger, and you're like, oh my God, this thing, you know that this thing is stressing you out. You know this thing is reminding you of a traumatic memory. So what you do is that your body is just trying to take a step back. So you don't really feel like you're there. That's the best way I can explain it, because this happens to me a lot. You don't really feel like you're there. Someone is talking to you, you're seeing something, yeah, but that reality, you're disconnected from yourself. You that you're experiencing that reality are disconnected from yourself. This is a very common symptom of fragmenting when you're traumatized. Another thing is disassociation, and I get this too a lot. People get different things, different kinds of fragmentation. But for me personally, I get depersonalization and disassociation a lot. Disassociation is when you just detach from something, like you detach from an event. So one thing that happens to me is that I might be on my phone and I might be like just looking at something, and something comes up and I'm like, oh my God, like it just reminds me of a certain thing that happened that was really distressing for me. I know that I'm holding my phone, but I don't really feel like I'm holding my phone. And it's a very scary experience. I think that there might be one or two people that might have experienced that, I don't know, but probably, maybe. And that is a kind of fragmentation that happens to people. And that kind have experienced this before is derealization. When people around you just seem unreal, your dad is shouting at you, and then all of a sudden you're asking yourself, is this real? Like, is it like what is going on? Like you can't really, you're not at that particular moment, you're disconnected from your reality. And I think the biggest kind of fragmentation that people know about is actually psychosis, or what people often wrongly refer to as schizophrenia a lot of times, because schizophrenia itself is, psychosis is a symptom that happens in a lot of other mental illnesses. And psychosis is most most advanced form of fragmentation, whereby you're just completely detached from reality. So for example, someone that has psychosis could be, is just might be eating rice and say they're eating beans. Your reality is like, you don't even know what's going on. You're doing something, but you're completely in another place. And all this fragmentation I'm taking my time out to explain is a way of the mind trying to cope and trying to sort of protect you, because it knows that if I don't protect you, something really bad could happen to you. I'm going to give two other examples because there are so many differences between, stress and trauma, but I'll give two other examples. Is that stress goes away when the source is removed. If, for example, your boss is stressing you out, if you go for a holiday, you don't think about your boss. That's it. Like, your boss is just stressing you out. And when you go for it, that's it. Like, you're not thinking about your boss and be like, oh my God, like, oh, like my boss is so wicked and all of that. No, you're just like, oh, I've forgotten him right now. But let's say your boss is harassing you sexually. You're thinking about it all the time. Your boss might not be there. You might even have left the workplace, but you're constantly like thinking about how your boss, took away your sense of self and your sense of integrity by forcing himself on you or something like that. And that's one of the major differences between trauma and stress. If we remove the source, if you think something is stressing in your life, you're not sure if it's trauma or stress. When you're away from that particular thing or person, are you just as distressed as when you're in the when you're in front of that source or when you're in direct contact with the source of that distress? Then biologically speaking, I know I said earlier that I was going to explain that trauma itself is also as much a biological phenomenon as it is a psychological. So biologically speaking, rather, one thing about trauma is that your brain is also in tandem with these experiences. So your amygdala, which is, I'm not going to get too technical because I'm not even a biology student, but like your amygdala is like a part of your brain, and it's really in charge of like emotions and stuff like that. And what happens with the amygdala is that, because, just to put that out there, the amygdala is what gives your memories meaning. It attaches sentiments to memories. And so it just makes sense that the amygdala is very involved when it comes to processing traumatic events and memories. So when you are stressed, the amygdala would, activate your stress, your stress axis, which stimulates like the release of stress hormones just temporarily. So you have things like cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine. I don't know if I said that right, but yeah, it does all these things, and it just helps you take a step back and say, okay, this is stressing me. My body is saying I need to shut down, so maybe I should just take a nap. That kind of thing. That's what happens when you're stressed. But you see, when you're traumatized, your amygdala will activate your pituitary glands, and those pituitary glands, they don't stop firing those warning signals long after you are away from it. You're still like, for example, you were raped. Long after you've been raped, you are still constantly stressed about it. Like, that's the thing about, so like your body is seeing that memory, but your body doesn't, it knows that this thing is distressing, but your body doesn't even know whether it's real life or it's a memory. It's just trying to protect you at all costs. So that is, that kind of work. When I give this example of your amygdala doing these two things, activating your stress hormones or activating things in your pituitary, the glands in your pituitary area, it's just in tandem with when stress is removed, when the source of stress is removed, your body just stops, and that's the thing. Even biologically, what happens is that after, when you're stressed, after your hippocampus shuts down just for a bit, but it comes back later to actually say, okay, the source of stress has been removed. Let me shut down this thing. Let it stop firing like warning signal. She's rested now. She's okay. But when you're traumatized, your hippocampus is overworked, overused. It doesn't even know what is going on. And then research actually shows that people that are traumatized, for example, people that have PTSD specifically, they have smaller hippocampi than people that are just normal, because it damages over time. Some research actually shows that it damages your hippocampus. So that's an example of of these things. Then I think one thing I would actually say is that when you're stressed, your thinking brain is, it can make sense of the situation. Your thinking brain is like your prefrontal cortex. It can make sense of the situation later. But when you are traumatized, you are constantly re-experiencing and reliving that stress. And what happens is that your thinking brain doesn't know how to can't really make sense of it. It doesn't understand the depth. It doesn't, because it hasn't processed it. It hasn't processed it yet. And that's the thing. Your thinking brain and your emotional brain, don't want to get too technical, but your thinking brain just can't process it at that point, and it just becomes, it can't just make depth of situation. And I would say, like, the last thing I would say about the difference between trauma and stress is that for stress, the antidote to stress is comfort. If I'm stressed out about work, I like eating food. I like eating food. I can buy ice cream and I am like, okay, I'm better now. I'm comforted. I could watch a movie. But the antidote to trauma is safety. Remember what we said about you not feeling safe in your body? You need to feel safe. And that is something that trauma strips you of. It strips you of your ability to feel safe in your body. Also, so yeah, that's really it for the differences between trauma and stress. I want to use something called the dead body analogy to just take my point home, so people have a better understanding of what trauma is. So if you there's something in like what they call it in like criminology where they say, or like in, just let me say criminology, but like in the law where they say that for you to prove that someone has been killed, you need a dead body. You need to show, that this person, you just need some form of like evidence. You need concrete proof that something terrible has happened. Something terrible has happened to this person. So the dead body analogy is like a really important, concept for trauma survivors, because if something bad happens, for example, if hot water poured on your hand, like really hot water, I don't think you are going to not shout. If hot water poured on your hand, you are going to shout, because you need, like, it's just like sometimes you need, actually you need help. That's what it is. You need help. You're not going to cry silently and your father is like in the next room. You are going to shout, yay, or something like that. And then he's going to come and he's going to help you. And that's an example of physical pain. When we're in physical pain, we need help. But when something traumatic happens to you, and it just makes sense that you're in pain and you need to show that something bad has happened to you. And so people, it's like something terrible happened and people can't see that something terrible has happened. So you becoming the dead body, you are becoming the evidence for this traumatic thing that's happened to you. You just need to, it's like it's a way of seeking help. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of times, people that are trauma survivors actually have a lot of shame in not being able to process their emotions, in feeling weak, in asking for help, and in feeling all the emotions that they are feeling. And this is because of a lot of stigma and all of that. So you have become like the dead body. Something terrible happened to you, you couldn't process it well, and that is fine. And so you became like this dead body that just needed like help. And people, and if people become dead bodies, is an analogy, not a real thing. But people become dead bodies in real ways. So in real ways, like, for example, you start, like, when maybe something bad happened to you, you start retreating into yourself, you start being really angry, you start doing that. And people were like, oh, she's just acting up. Oh, like, but they don't see that this is actually a cry for help. A lot of people don't have the range to understand that you are actually alive, but you're not really living. It's affecting you a lot. And I think this everybody analogy is really pertinent, because people need to know that there's nothing wrong with you when you react in a certain way. Like, it's just it's you trying to keep yourself alive. I'm not going to stop saying this. You are trying to keep yourself alive, because trauma is a very grave thing to go through. And a lot of times when you don't have, actually, the statistics really say that when you have unprocessed trauma, and it's like that, you're liable to a lot of suicidal ideation and even going ahead with suicide. So it's something that people should be easy on themselves on. If I again still say a mental health professional, we'll get to that in a bit. But it's important that when you're seeing a mental health professional, you are also very, very, don't let me say you're aware. Sometimes it's not that easy to just be aware and to be sure of yourself, because people that are traumatized are constantly not used to being sure of themselves. But it's important that you try to trust your gut feelings, because just personally, my experience with a lot of mental health professionals have been such that they value their experience, or they value their training over patients' experiences, which is very wrong. This is very wrong. There's so much research that shows that lived experiences of patients should be included in research and all of that, and also in treatment. You don't value your training over people's ex. And if there's a mental professional here listening, I want to say that you don't value your training over a patient's treatment, because there's so much. You don't value your training over a patient's experience, rather, because there's so much that the field of psychiatry and psychology don't know about. It's very important that people listen to people that have lived experiences. And so I think it's like, very important that people also trust their gut feelings. When something is wrong, don't let the mental health professional tell you, no, no, it's not like that. No, it's, yeah, one good way to do it is that every time something is wrong, every time you experience a symptom, you write it down. You keep a little note and you write these things down. So you know that you're not crazy, you're not imagining it. I write all these things down. It's really important.